I grew up on what you Americans would call an Indian reservation in northern Manitoba. And when I was growing up, my res was the last stop for gas before basically the road stopped. And so people would often stop at the gas station in my hometown. One day I was there and there was this huge van waiting for gas. And my dad was talking to these guys in the van. And back then I hadn't really met very many white guys or very many white people. So imagine how terrified I was to be the 6-year-old little native girl seeing this huge guy with like piercing blue eyes who was even taller than my dad. My dad has been talking to these guys for a while before I showed up, and he tells them like, hey, my little girl wants to grow up to be a wrestler. And he looks at me and he says, these guys are wrestlers. And the big scary guy with the blue eyes looks at me and says hi, and he crouches down and gets to my eye level and like coaxes me out from behind my dad, and he asks me my name, and I have my hand in my mouth, so I mumble it, and then I tell him again when I take my hand out of my mouth. And he asked me who my favorite wrestler was. And I said, Bret Hart. And he asked me, so you want to be a wrestler? And I nod, and I'm like, yeah, I do, but I can't. And he says, why? And I tell him, because girls can't be wrestlers. He's sad for a second, and then he says, well, what about Luna Vachon? And I had never heard anyone put respect on Luna Vachon's name when I was a kid. So I asked this guy, who ended up being called Adam, if he could teach me how to do a hurricanrana. And it was only later, like, when I saw Adam on TV wrestling as Edge, though I didn't end up becoming a wrestler, I'm still involved in the community, and I am filming a documentary on pro wrestling and the exact tour that brought Adam Edge to the north of my province. And I hope that, like, he realizes how important that, like, 5 minutes where he talked to a little 6-year-old nerd in the parking lot of a gas station in northern Manitoba, how much that 5 minutes meant to me, because he was the first dude outside of my grandfather and my dad who thought I could grow up to be anything I wanted.
Oh, I like this call for so many different reasons. First of all, do all Canadians love Bret Hart? Is that just how that works? Was Bret Hart really every single Canadian's favorite wrestler? I guess if you're a little 6-year-old girl who likes wrestling, of course he's going to be. But the main reason is, as I sit here in my apartment in Chicago, Illinois, a big bustling city, I realize that I'm in this metropolitan area. There's a lot going on. There's so much wrestling happening here all the time. But there's other people listening to this show from all over the world. And I have wrestled on these small reservations in Canada. And it gives you a second to think about how, because of the internet, we are all connected. Back in that time, when those guys were doing those death tours, there was no internet. And if there was, it was not accessible. So it's just like you go to a show, you hope that the local promoter put up some posters, you do the show and you go on to the next town, and there's no other way to get connected to the wrestling fans. It's just wait until they come the next time. But now this woman who's on a reservation, a native lady, can call in and tell her story of being so far away at the time, but now being so close, because we can all be so close because of wrestling and because of the internet. And I'm glad you were able to stay close to wrestling and stay true to your heart. And what a fun story, too, just proving how great of a guy that Adam/Edge is. And it's always fun to hear those stories of before they were stars. And I bet it'd be pretty wild to be so young and to see this guy who's doing these small little tours, and then a year or 2 years later is on national television and becomes this huge megastar. I think that's the fun part of wrestling. It's the fun part of the independence. And it's the fun part of the scene just in general. Thank you for your call, and I appreciate the diversity, really, that it brings to the show. Hey, thanks for watching. That call was part of a whole podcast called Wrestling Anonymous. Listen to the whole thing weekly. Wherever you listen to your podcast, go subscribe. And while you're at it, subscribe right here on YouTube to Colt Cabana's channel. Thank you.